There are a few news articles that are interesting here. Russian security researcher, there's internet connected pet feeders. God only knows why. But apparently you can dial up on a phone and feed your pet while you're traveling through the internet. And of course, the thing is garbage with some ridiculous security flaw. So some Russian security researcher found a way to totally hack in and take control of it and use it to make a botnet and alter it to upload modified firmware to make it in anything you want, just sort of like those cheap webcams, and announced it and told them, and they're supposedly going to patch it. And she has kept some of the details of the attack secret for the moment, so hopefully there won't be a huge botnet made of them right away. But, you know, that's the whole Internet of Things. Put everything on the internet as cheap as possible. And of course, they're vulnerable like crazy with nonsense like a default password and stuff like that.
So there was one is to have fat cats have it.
No, she wanted to get a bug bounty, but the company said they have no bug bounty program. They're not going to give her anything. But maybe they'll patch it. So anyway, so this is an interesting issue. Public keys, you remember the RSA email encryption, not RSA, PGP email encryption, where you have these keys. The problem is key handling is such a drag that nobody, including the inventors, can use it. In principle, it's secure. If you make a private key and encrypt stuff and post a public key, nobody, the other person posts a public key, you encrypt it, they have their private key secret. Nobody can read that, not even the NSA. And it's fine for a few months until you get a new computer or something, and then you have to move the private key, and then you're hosed from that point on. So what they point out, same thing's true of SSH keys. You have these private keys on your machine. There's public key that's proven on the server, and it sounds good, but in practice, it turns out to be a bad idea because sooner or later you're going to lose some of those keys, and they're going to leak out. So to solve this problem, Cloudflare has some kind of key management system they will give you. And this is related to something we'll talk about tonight. When you use cloud services, typically you lose control of everything because there's all these free trials and services all over the place, and nobody even knows who's using them or where all the passwords are or anything. And Cloudflare is offering to be a security broker here. So they will handle your SSH keys for you. So you always go through Cloudflare, and therefore you know where they are, and you can delete them and that sort of thing. And I don't know if you like Cloudflare for this or not. I like Cloudflare pretty much. But anyway, you certainly do need something like this, a central authentication like a domain controller for your cloud services. We have one place where all the credentials are, so you can tell how many, anyway. So this would be pretty cool. Maybe I'll write a project about it or something. It'd be good to learn how to do these things. So China has been dead set against cryptocurrency, but last week they completely reversed course. And President Xi said, we're going to totally jump into blockchain technology. There's great opportunities here, and he's going to push it forward, and everyone is required to do this very soon. And so I guess China's going to jump into cryptocurrency. Now, if they'd asked me, I would have said no. I thought they were one of the smartest nations on earth to say we're not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole because there's no actual value in cryptocurrency as far as I can tell. But anyway, they're going to jump into it. We'll see what happens. Yeah. Yes, which is not something they want. My money laundering is the only value I know, and I would think the Chinese government wouldn't want to encourage that. So I'm sure they'll try to somehow make it trackable and monitored, and then I don't know what value it has at all. But anyway, yeah. Well, that's true. They might use it to escape external laws like sanctions, and that's true. There might be a way to bypass like export restrictions like Trump's. In fact, that might be the point. It might be a way to funnel money into the country. Why couldn't they just use Bitcoin for that? But anyway, maybe that's the plan, that they can avoid sanctions this way. Well, the banks are trying to get into cryptocurrency, but I'm not sure to evade anything. But you could already evade anything by using Zcash. I mean, Zcash is anonymous. Yeah.
I was just going to say after you were finished that I watched this show on Netflix called Inside Bill's Mind, and it's like 3-part series about Bill Gates. Last episode,
yeah,
they talked about this nuclear reactor that he had these two guys develop, and it uses depleted uranium, and they wanted like some company in China to make it, but it kind of is in limbo because of the tariff situation. But it's basically like pretty much autonomous nuclear reactor, and it's like they upgraded a lot of stuff. It's pretty interesting.
They're trying to build a nuclear reactor in China, and what's the advantage of that?
Well, I mean, I was thinking that cryptocurrency takes up a lot of energy, and so if they had access to the reactor, then it would offset.
Well, that's if Bitcoin uses up a lot of energy because it uses proof of work. You could make one that's not based on proof of work. Like it could just be centralized and controlled by a central agency, like Libra is going to be. And that is what I assume China would want. And therefore, it's not really a cryptocurrency. It's just another kind of fiat currency. That's right. We'll see what comes out of this. But, you know, that's why it's all pretty shaky. Anyway, so this was interesting. There's this book out, Leaking the Secrets, about what happened with Mattis. Mattis does not want to be disloyal and criticize the president, but some other guy published this book and made Mattis very mad. And anyway, I thought there were a lot of interesting things here. They're talking about how difficult it is to deal with Trump, of course, and how he doesn't warn people and throws them off. So we'll talk about this. You know, it's anyway, I forget what I thought was so exciting about this one. Is very interesting though. Everyone expected this to go to Amazon. The entire Pentagon decided about a year ago that the entire Pentagon is going to go in the cloud and they're going to give it all to one provider. So the only contenders are Azure and Amazon. And Amazon is by far the obvious winner because they're more mature and have everything. But Trump hates Amazon because it's owned by Bezos, who owns the Washington Post. And he has said, absolutely torpedo Amazon getting it. And now Microsoft got it. So there will probably be crazy lawsuits and everything. Microsoft, of course, says they deserve it. Microsoft has a close relationship with the military. The U.S. Army standardized on Vista. I think if I was the lawyer, I could make a very good case for saying Microsoft is a more expected military provider and they all our rules and we have a good relationship with them, and Amazon is just for civilians. So anyway, we'll see what's going to happen. But if this is true, I think it will make Azure the #1 cloud provider. This is a huge contract. It was #2, and I think this is enough money to make it #1. That's why there were some teachers around here teaching Azure, and I'm like, why waste your time on that junk? Teach Amazon. And they said, oh, Azure is awesome, and maybe they're right. Maybe Azure is more important than Amazon. This single purchase might make Azure more important than Amazon. Anyway, we'll see what comes of it. So we're up to the 3rd chapter here, and strangely, all right. This mute all button doesn't work too well. Anyway, all right, so let's take a look at the chapter. I've got a bit of a chapter to show you, which is the 3rd part of chapter 3, and it's here. All right, so there's one more part of this chapter coming up, but this is enough for one day. So we're in the risk management life cycle, the 2nd part of it here. So the first thing is just asset identification. I mentioned this before, especially now in the world of the cloud, just asking people, what is your assets? How many copies of it are there? And where is it is enough to stump people. And obviously you have to do that first. What do you care about and where is it? So you got hardware assets, that's relatively easy, right? Or at least you think that would be easy. You know how many computers you bought, how many servers and switches and such. But often people don't really keep it up to date, and they buy more stuff and they move it around and hook in stuff and bring in stuff from home, and you don't actually know what all your hardware is. So you might have security software keeping track of it all. Now you can have security scanning software, which tries to scan it all for vulnerabilities, and you can have patch management, tries to make sure it's all updated. And there's asset inventory systems all by themselves, like Landesk that we're setting up in the other class, Thursday class. I finally got Landesk working, and boy, it was a struggle. So my incident response class will be struggling through many projects, setting up a Active Directory domain and configuring Landesk to manage it. And that's what you do. You get these third-party solutions which keep track of all your hardware and all the software on them and what people are doing. But anyway, so you want to know exactly what all your stuff is, model and serial number, how much it's worth, where it is, what security classification it has. We'll talk about it later, but your stuff should be classified. Your hardware has to be classified in addition to the software. And then you've got groups and owners and custodians. And just like we talked about before, the owner is the person responsible for maintaining that object, and they may not have to do all the work directly. They maybe have a custodian whose job is to actually implement the changes, but the owner is responsible to make sure the right thing is done. So the owner will say, put on the patches, and the custodian will be responsible for putting on the patches. But the owner is the one responsible for the policy decisions, and the custodian is only responsible for obeying orders. So your physical inventory is just like a store. You have to actually go walk around and touch everything and add it up and make sure where it is, because people might be stealing it, moving it without permission, doing various weird things. And so your computer file may not reflect reality. So you have to do a real physical inventory now and then of your physical stuff. But the hard part is the information assets. The fundamental problem is what the recording industry found out. You can make copies of data and you will never know it happened. You haven't lost the original. So how do you really know that's not happening? And the answer is it's very hard. So you've got a lot of kinds of data that you have to control, like your customer data, your intellectual property, your merger plans, your business operations, and that sort of thing. And then you got virtual assets, like all the cloud services you subscribe to, where you don't even own those. You're just leasing them, like an Amazon machine. And so you don't actually own anything, but it would cost you money to rebuild it if you lost it. So it has a certain replacement cost, even if it doesn't exactly have a value in the normal sense. So your information assets are held by another company. And like I say, it's very easy to not even know how many of these are out there. And that's why you really need to have a cloud access security broker, where all your cloud access goes through one place, so you can know how many accounts do we have on which services and who is using them and who has different access levels and when have we terminated it and made sure it's gone and stopped using that provider. That's the kind of stuff you need to have, which is not easy, because people just get in the habit of buying a virtual machine, throwing whatever they want on it, company data without telling anybody. And you can't have that if you're going to meet any compliance standard or have any control of what you're doing. So these are your virtual assets. The problem is, it used to be, if you want to put up a server, you have to go through purchasing, buy a server, put it in a rack, configure backup and all that. So you had to actually go through the official company process. But now you can just go spin up a virtual machine on some cloud service and put your stuff on it, and nobody in your company has to know you did that. You can totally just do it. And that means you get this virtual sprawl. People are just putting stuff on all these cloud services and you don't really have any control over it. And so it's a big issue. And you've got both software servers, software databases, and software network devices. And no intrinsic way to know that's happening or prevent it. You're going to have policies which you enforce with administrative controls, since you really can't have much in the way of a technical control to prevent this stuff. So anyway, then you got to classify your assets. You got to figure out how important all your things are. So you got criticality, which is how important this is to you. So you might have customer information that's sensitive because you'll be embarrassed and incur a financial loss if it leaks. And then you got stuff you just need to keep your network going, which is not because you're worried about it leaking, but because you need it to be intact to keep your services up. And so that's criticality. Figure out how your resources are. So that's how you determine whether you want to protect it, whether you need to have redundant servers to keep it up in case things go down, and how you're going to handle disasters, and who you're going to let at it, who you're going to give different privileges to it. All these things are decisions you make after deciding how critical the information is. So the best approach is to start with information and classify it, not with hardware, but with the information, and then classify the systems that handle the information, because you really don't care about the hardware. I mean, nobody really cares much about hardware. Software is worth more than hardware in almost all cases. That's why you use the hardware. And the hardware is replaceable and alterable. What matters, the value of the hardware, unless you are a hardware designer and you have prototypes like Apple, where the hardware itself is actually super important and secret, the hardware is kind of unimportant. What matters is the information on it. And here's what people often overlook, is data that is off in the unapproved systems, like those unexpected cloud providers, so they don't know about it, and data that's not well structured. Anyway, so you analyze your data for criticality, how important it is to maintain integrity and its sensitivity with things like monetary value and other considerations to decide how important this stuff is. And then you put it in categories like secret, restricted, confidential, public. And then you label the systems as well. So the secret data is on the secret system and the public data is on the public system, and so on. So then you have information handling rules like these. Your secret data will be things like passwords, restricted as credit card numbers, your system documents and brochures over here. And so if you put it on a server, the high level stuff has to be encrypted. If you put it in the cloud, you can just say the highest level stuff should never be put in the cloud, which is what a lot of people do. I mean, the number one obstacle to cloud deployments is people are afraid of security. They're afraid that when you put something in the cloud, you might lose control of it. And that is absolutely true in practice. A large number of people put stuff in the cloud that turns out it's in an open EC2 bucket, or something else foolish happens, and you wish they had just stuck it on your own server and not put it in the cloud. So this is a common system. Don't put the most critical stuff in the cloud. If you do want to put it in the cloud, you really should have to be very careful to correctly configure those cloud. And so you got other things here like hard copy, you figure out where it should be, and hard copy destruction. You have to shred and maybe burn stuff, and you got soft copy destruction. So make sure that you're erasing the media before you throw away soft electronic copies of data on old hard drives or whatever you've got. Anyway, so you got systems like you have database management servers that probably have a lot of crucial data. You have a DMZ firewall, and that in itself doesn't have any customer data on it, but if it were to be compromised, it would let people from your low security network get to your high security network, so it probably needs a relatively high classification. And the time server is another one. I mean, the time server doesn't have any confidential data, but it is every device in your network calls out to the time server periodically to synchronize the clock. So it is, you can do some harm with that. And that's something H.D. Moore did about 10 years ago. He had a very good presentation where he took over the internet time servers and found out that he could do internal maps of every network by just querying them because the time servers were keeping caches. He found out that he could make massive DDoS attacks through them because the NTP protocol had a strong amplification. You know, at first, people thought it doesn't matter, but it's not that simple. It might have an effect on your servers, which is different than what you'd think. You just think, what does it matter? Time is wrong, who cares? Well, it can matter. And of course, your physical facilities may be classified. You have physical documents stored, then you have to have a top secret location, a top secret room with physical security on the doors and such. There was a pen test I heard a talk at a conference about in Pennsylvania, where they went to I think a government office in Pennsylvania, and they had a secret, highly secure location. And the pen test was to see if they could find the secret location and break into it. And they just went on Foursquare, which was real hot at that time, and people would check in with their physical GPS coordinates, and they found out where the employees were going. They found the location, they went there, they dug a tunnel underneath the fence, they got in, took selfies of them in the server room. You know, that's the physical pen test. They picked the locks, overcame the security systems, and got in. You know, anyway, so your network has to be segmented. So you got the internet, they come through a firewall, then there's the DMZ with the public servers like your web server and email server, and then there's another firewall which blocks even more and usually makes sure that you're really an authorized user before you get to the development and the corporation internal network. That's typically what you have. I know our college has 100 VLANs. You typically separate things like crazy, this division, that division, that division, because you don't want to just mix it all in a flat network, because bad guys will get in, and you want to make sure there are more barriers. So even, for example, you got the public labs of students using the machines. Now, obviously, they could get infected with malware. Just anybody could just walk in here and start doing bad things on there. So you don't want that to be on the same network as stuff like the payroll and the student grades or anything. That's got to be separate. So you got to evaluate how valuable your assets are. One simple way is just qualitative, rate them from 1 to 10. Which ones are more valuable than others? Realistically, that might be all you can really do, but you can try to get a real dollar value with replacement cost. How much would it cost to fix it if it was gone? Some kind of book value for server depreciating like a car. The amount of revenue it's generating, that's net present value. The amount of time it would take to rebuild it for virtual machines or reacquire it. And then there's the consequent financial cost, which is how much would it cost us if this thing got breached? Those are all different ways to measure the value. The bottom one is probably the most important, but the most hard to get. I mean, settlements after breaches have been as low as 20 cents a record and as high as $200 a record. And then there's reputational cost, which is very hard to evaluate. Most companies, their stock goes down for like 3 days and then it just comes back up. So maybe there's no reputational cost, but nobody really knows. This is very hard. And I do not understand how anybody can sell cyber insurance, because if I had to do the fiduciary table and say how much do we expect if we insure 1,000 companies, how much dollars do we expect to lose, I would really have a hard time even getting to within a factor of 10. So how do I know how much they should be paying in premiums? Anyway, they are selling cyber insurance, although I have heard that if you get ransomware, they will often refuse to pay, just like they have some sleazy clause that somehow that doesn't count.
Like all these houses just got free.
Like what?
Had their fire insurance policies canceled yesterday.
Oh, the people who had fire insurance, they just canceled instead of paying for the fire because that was an act of God or something?
In the past, so they canceled it before
They canceled it?
Canceled the insurance of a whole bunch of.
Can they do that?
In the path of the oncoming
How?
fire, they hadn't been burned yet.
But how can they do that?
I think it was 350,000 homes.
Man, that seems to violate the whole point of insurance. The insurance company can just decide to cancel it at any time?
Would the insurance commission will get on the company?
I don't know.
Maybe their excuse is the utility company is declaring brush or something.
Well, they are, but you have to read that's right, to read the contract of your insurance very carefully. You often find that the insurance won't actually pay. Yeah, well, they shouldn't be able to. That's sort of like the health insurance dropping you for pre-existing conditions. But anyway, if it was in the contract, though, then they probably can't. Anyway, that's an issue. So I got some hoots about that. And I hear a chat coming in. Let's see. They will lose in court. Well, I hope so, although I'm not so sure. In the Republican administration, they might well get away with that.
The insurance commission will go after the company, right?
They could, but if it's in the contract that they had the right to cancel it, then they might get away with it.
Yeah, look right here. 350,000 California residents dropped by insurers over wildfire risk. August 22nd, 2019.
Man, that's. I hope they don't get away with that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do.
August, you say the August?
Maybe they
So it's not now.
So it's not now. Yeah, I guess I misread that. It's not
Okay.
now, but still, they canceled it right before fires.
Yeah, well, yeah. I know there was like an airline that just decided not to pay the pension and apparently got away with it. Amazing stuff happens. I guess. Yeah, it's better to have money than insurance. You can do it. Yeah. Yep. Insurance is not at all a panacea like you might think. But a lot of people are getting ransomware insurance these days. It's real hot. So, and apparently it does pay out. I have a lot of people, at least a large portion of the time it pays out. I've also heard that 40% of the time, you don't really get the right keys from the bad guy, even if you pay the ransom. Anyway. So, I'll wait a few more seconds and see if we got any more. Didn't study. Well, my goodness. There may be such a thing as too much honesty. My sister said she had to stop joining Facebook groups with the students because she joined their Facebook group and then she'd find them discussing how to cheat on the test and stuff. She said, I'm probably better off not saying this. Anyway. All right. Let's see how it looks. What's that?
Can you send it? I'd like to know how to avoid my taxes.
How to avoid your taxes?
Is that what you just said?
No.
Oh,
Facebook.
Facebook.
They're cheating on tests, not taxes. My dad was the expert at cheating on taxes. I did not learn it from him. Okay, so which one of these is sometimes automatically created through elasticity? All right, this was in the slide, Joel. I didn't mention it today. Amazon has an elastic feature, so you can have a server, and if you get more traffic, it spins up more servers. So you have new assets automatically created. They call that elastic computing. So you might have more servers than you think you have. Anyway, which one will discover hardware theft? All right, it's physical inventory. Of course, you have to actually count your stuff. All right. So the cost of a breach. Okay, that's the consequent cost. Good. And the revenue generation. All right, that's net present value, the amount of money it's making for you now. So cap and M dot, I know who that is. And carry, I know who that is too. Okay. All right, so let's carry on here. So to identify your threats, you got internal threats, which are people inside your company, and external threats from the outside. And then one category of external threats is the advanced persistent threats, which are the enemy nation states performing espionage on you primarily. And then emerging threats are people who use the most new exciting attacks. So there are sources of threat intelligence. There are a bunch of commercial companies that will sell you threat intelligence. I hear them advertising all the time on the podcasts. But you can also go to standard ones. There's some NIST publications with simple categories, but you can subscribe to a threat intelligence service, and they will give you a regular update of queries about your company and such, so you know what people are posting about you on Pastebin and such. And there's internal threats or people in your company causing a problem. The most common problem, of course, is your own employees making mistakes. Not even evil intention, but your own employees doing foolish things, leaking the data, corrupting the data, being tricked by bad people that are doing things, or disgruntled personnel betraying you in various ways. These are the insider threat. Obviously, your own employees have access to this stuff and the opportunity to make mistakes, and that is the most common thing that's going to happen. All the attacks from the outside are more rare. Then, of course, there are employees that are traitors. And I thought it's funny, they described it in vague terms. I don't know why. These are all famous cases. I've been through them in my other classes. This was the Terry Childs case, the San Francisco network manager that locked everybody out of our own municipal network, hiding the keys until he was taken to prison, and then he gave it to the mayor, who was Gavin Newsom at that time. This was Esquivel, I think was this guy. He was a Belgian or French trader who lost billions of dollars, billions of euros in a French brokerage house because he overcame he was a securities investor, and he had a cap on the investment he was allowed to make, like only 50,000 euros. And he found a way to manipulate the system so he could exceed that and managed to bet billions of euros and lose them all. And he got like a 6-month suspended sentence and immediately got hired by another company that said, this guy must be a genius. So anyway, then there's this is of course Snowden, a security contractor who then took secrets and leaked them out of political motivation. And this is what scares people. I mean, you have, of course, the usual thing. Your employees might make mistakes, or they might be poorly trained. But what if they totally decide to betray you? Then what are you going to do? And this is why everyone's freaking out and buying services that try to detect who's disloyal. And at the NSA, they're making everybody take a polygraph every 3 months. They're trying to figure out who is like disloyal, which is almost black magic, but certainly important. Ever since Snowden, everybody is terrified. That could happen to us. It totally could happen to you, that one of your trusted insiders deliberately leaks out your stuff. And what a mess. I'd like to buy insurance for that, but I don't know how you'd sell that anyway. So this one's pretty, then there's the man-made threats. Your people could just be idiots like Giuliani, who just turns on his phone and calls reporters and carries on confidential financial discussions with reporters listening in. That's why I thought it was funny, like about 2 weeks ago, I heard them say, Giuliani keeps going on all the shows saying these stupid things. And they finally asked one of the president's cabinet members, like, who thinks Giuliani is helping you? And he said, there is one person over here that thinks Giuliani is helping us, and he's the only one. But anyway, so you've got your employees will make all sorts of mistakes. People might eavesdrop on them, DOS attacks, fires. There's many kinds of man-made threats that will hit you. And then there's natural threats, earthquakes and solar flares and floods and all that. All these things also you deal with disaster planning. And then you got former employees, people who have left the company but still somehow have credentials to get in, either because you haven't been diligent about removing the credentials as soon as they leave, or you're not really sure they left. A big thing at this college, like they ask us, how many students are in your class? And I say, well, that's a good question. 6 of them showed up in the room, 3 of them turned in online, 12 of them turned into homework. This book says 40. I have no idea how many people are still in the class. It depends on how you define it. And I think companies sometimes have the same problem. Anyway, and there's various people out there that might attack you for a variety of reasons, and they might have different motivations. For a while, back in 2011, 2012, there's a bunch of people that just want to make political statements by hacking people and dumping out their data. That's not so common anymore. Now it's mostly for money. But then there's a lot of political stuff coming from all the military, hacking everybody. The China is hacking everybody to steal your intellectual property to advance their nation. And Russia is hacking us just to harm us because they believe in a zero-sum game, and they believe that anything that tears America down, we're down to their benefit, which is probably true because they're hoping they can scare America so we'll leave the international field like we did in Syria and just let them take it over because they want to take over more territory, and they wish we would stop projecting our values into the rest of the world. And that does appear to be working very well under the Trump administration. Anyway, there's just a lot of people out there with a lot of reasons to come for you, and you would want to analyze your business and decide how big these risks are for you. This is why I know a major security company that will not accept any contracts in Saudi Arabia right now because that would expose them to political attacks from other members of the security community. They would be boycotted or something because a lot of the security community is currently very angry at Saudi Arabia. At least they were 6 months ago. I think they've probably forgotten by now. But there was a period of time when they were very mad about the journalist who got killed in Saudi Arabia, and it was the popular country to hate for a while. So that's the kind of thing, you make a business decision not to do things that will irritate the people you're afraid of. Anyway, so there's APTs. These are nation-state espionage primarily, although I suppose in principle, this type of attack could be organized crime. In practice, the only APT threat actors, there's only like 43 of them, and they're all military. Primarily Russia, America, North Korea, and I forget the fourth one, Iran, the main ones. And so these people are trying to perform military attacks on the internet. So they want to take over military contractors and companies with critical national infrastructure like Boeing and NASA. And they want to stick assets inside your network, secret backdoors that will last there forever so they can continually monitor what you're doing and steal your data. And that's the point. They sneak in very quietly. They don't, and they want to establish a permanent persistence in your network. Then China started it all. APT1 was China, and they are very, very effective at penetrating almost all the American big companies and maintaining a permanent persistence there. And as we've talked about, it's quite a chore to get rid of them. So that's one category. And then there's the emerging threats. I see a chat message coming in. My opinion on the movie Deep State, I know nothing about it. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen movies in a while. Somebody could give a talk about it for all I know. I don't even know there is such a movie. There's an opinion for you. I am completely ignorant. So anyway, let's see, there may be another chat message. Perhaps you're going to tell us something about it. Yeah, you will. Good. Yeah, give us a talk about it. I'd like to see it. Anyway, so all right, so you got emerging technology. These are the new threats, the new attacks. This is something people sometimes complain about in the security echo chamber. If you go to conferences like DEF CON and Black Hat, there's a bunch of talks about the new exciting attack. And then people say, how much does it really matter about the new exciting attack? When you actually look at how people get hacked, they mostly get hacked with stuff that was patched 5 years ago. So realistically, it probably isn't all that important to pay that much attention to the new exciting attack. Probably just like most real security professionals I know have said, if you just stopped using default passwords and actually stopped your employees from bringing in junk from home and connecting to your network and doing simple things like that, that would do you a lot more good than worrying about the new exciting things. But anyway, there are some people that do the new exciting things. So emerging technologies, latest techniques, these are exciting. And of course, some of them turn out to be very important. All right, so you got vulnerability identification. There's configuration errors. This is extremely common. You have devices with default passwords or other obvious flaws like a flat network that's not segmented. There are devices with design flaws. And there's known unpatched weaknesses. These are where you have things like was Equifax. There was a patch for their web server which they did not put on. So they got hacked. They're not putting on a known patch. Then there's, of course, weaknesses that the manufacturer knows about and has chosen not to provide a patch for. Therefore, you would have, in principle, no way to know about that, although, in fact, there are people who have insider programs where you establish a trust relationship with the vendor or with third-party security companies like Rapid7. You can sign up for their confidential program, and they will tell you stuff that is not public yet. that they have found out and display you secret ways to deal with it so other people don't know. And this is what people do, because once it becomes public knowledge, the bad guys will start fixing it. So, for example, in the Al-Qassam cyber army attacks, a series of DDoS attacks against American banks to punish them for a YouTube video insulting Muhammad, they were a secret club of insiders at the banks that would trade threat information to stop those attacks, and they would not distribute it more widely because they didn't want the bad guys to know that they were onto them any sooner than that had to happen. Anyway, so then there's, of course, undiscovered weaknesses that nobody knows about. Those are the 0 days that you cannot do anything about directly, but you can still practice defense in depth, like network segmentation and such, which will give you some defense even if somebody gets through one of your defenses with an unpatchable weakness. And then there's third-party vulnerabilities. If you're using somebody else's stuff, then you don't know that they are keeping their stuff patched, not leaking out passwords and all that jazz. And there's a bunch of breaches where cloud providers get hacked and get your data, even though your company didn't get hacked. So it's a big issue. So you got threats, which are bad things that might happen. You got threat actors, which are the people who do the bad things. You have vulnerabilities, which allow the bad things to penetrate your defenses. And then you got assets, which you have to value, determine how much harm it's going to do. And the impact is how much actual damage will be done if a threat is realized. So risk, there's different calculations here. You take threats times vulnerabilities, sometimes times asset values, sometimes times probabilities, and you get various measures of risk. All right. So to determine the likelihood, there's your general hygiene. Are you careful? Do your people have social engineering training? Are your people careful not to click on links? And do you actually lock the doors and all that jazz? Your general, just good security practices make you less likely to fall for things. Your visibility is important. If you are a well-known, famous company that is in the news all the time, you're going to get attacked by more people. If nobody's ever heard of you and you're hiding, you might get away with flying under the radar. Then there's an issue of how quickly threats are going to come in, whether you can find out in advance, and the motivation and skill of your attackers. All these things differ for every business, and your mitigations should be balanced to reflect these. So the impact, you can directly lose money, hurt your reputation, lose business or market share as your systems are down and the opponents go up. In fact, I think this, for a while, a few years ago, I read that this was like the #3 most common reason for DDoS attacks, is people would hire criminals to DDoS their competitors so business would come to me, which is, because it turns out there's a bunch of DDoS actors for a really small amount of money, for like $50, they'll take down somebody for a day. So you can just take down your opponent like on Thanksgiving weekend, and then you'll go to the #2 provider of whatever it is, and it's really cheap, and the money goes out of the country with Bitcoin, so you probably won't get caught. And so that's what a lot of people do. A lot of people build these botnets by just hijacking other people's stuff, like their dog food feeders. Now you have a botnet, you can DDoS people. They just advertise on the dark web, I'll DDoS anybody for like 50 or $100, and people do it. Anyway, so then of course you've got the lawsuits that will come out of this. If people sue you for non-compliance, for leaking data, and so on, these are all the possible impacts if some threat gets in. And so you can have a risk analysis where you have the probability of it and the consequences. So things that are unlikely and only slightly harmful, you can just ignore them. But things that are very likely or very harmful are higher risks, and you probably should put some effort into mitigating them. So the risk analysis techniques, you got to determine your asset value. What kind of threats might come in, how likely they are to happen, what your vulnerabilities are that would make those threats like to be realized, and then consider how effective your existing controls are, whatever you have in the way of defenses, and how much the impact will be if something gets through your defenses, and all that has to factor into whether it's worth putting up more controls to mitigate that risk or not. So you have to get information by interviewing all the people involved and looking at security incidents and analysis of what happened to your competitors and other similar organizations and prior risk assessments. Yeah.
Do they do anything with big data, like scanning lots and lots of companies to figure out how much attention the company's getting, what the likelihood might be, past likelihood?
Well, some people do. I know Rapid7 does that. Rapid7 scans the entire internet every hour, and they publish the results, and they figure out how many people are infected by different kinds of malware. And that's where they figured out that like the top 10 exploited vulnerabilities are all like 5 years old. But certainly, like I say, you can subscribe to these commercial services, and there's also news article stuff that will try to compare you to businesses of your type. And as far as I know, I don't know anyone doing it themselves in an amateur way, but you certainly could. This is why people subscribe to like trade magazines in their field. Like I know when the college had a big security incident a few years ago because of our cook and CTO making a fake virus outbreak, there was a lot of discussion of how secure our college was. And I'd done a lot of assessment of other colleges, so I knew that our college was in fact far better than most other colleges. We are really much more careful about security here than most places, and way above the high schools. Man, I tried reporting vulnerabilities to high schools because they were awful, and people would just hang up on me and lie to me and stuff. I mean, they're way back there. But colleges are typically very, very bad at security because, you know, they have a messy place. Nobody's really in charge. They got no money, and they got no real assets. Nobody really cares. So anyway, but yeah, this is a big issue, and I know the banks are all in lockstep. They talk to each other a lot, and they make sure that they're doing what the other banks do. That is their legal defense, is to say we are up to the industry standards. It doesn't even matter if it's right or wrong. For legal risk, it just means you have to show that you weren't any dumber than the other guys. Then you're okay. At least you're okay to some extent. Anyway, so you can have qualitative risk analysis, high versus low, or put it on some kind of semi-numerical scale, or you can try to get actual costs. But realistically, you have to remember, whenever someone claims to know the actual costs or actual projection of money, they're just making it up. This is why, you know, back in 1999 and 2000 and 2001, everybody drew a straight line and said, we have to invest in the internet. We're going to get rich, rich, rich. Like people took the Bitcoin from like 2015, 16, 17 and said, oh my God, Bitcoin's going up. It's going to be $100,000 soon. And of course, that didn't happen. And like, how many times do you have to fall for this before you wise up? Things go up for a while, then they go down for a while. But anyway, so if people claim to know exactly what the dollar counting risk is, you probably know that's a guess anyway. So it probably would be more realistic to just say you really only know on a scale from 1 to 5. But anyway, the quantitative value, you have the asset value, which is how much it would cost to buy another one usually. The exposure factor is how much it will get hurt. Then you have single loss expectancy. That's how much you're going to lose if the bad thing happens. The exposure factor is how likely that is to happen. Then you should get the annualized rate of occurrence. Given all of our gadgets and the risk, how many total events are we going to have per year? Then you multiply that by the asset value and the exposure factor, and you get the annualized loss expectancy. How many total dollars per year are we going to lose from this threat? And now that you've had that, you can compare that to the annual cost of some defense, like insurance or a new firewall or something. And then you can decide whether it's worth paying for that defense or whether it's not worth paying for that defense because the defense costs more than the amount you expect to lose. That's quantitative analysis. Yeah.
And the exposure factor, that's like a coefficient?
Yeah. That's like a percentage. How much total will you lose if a bad thing occurs? That's how you get single loss expectancy. Yeah. I think that's it. I'm not completely sure though, because I sort of lost faith in the system. Like when I took economics, they had all these formulas, and they told me they recently gave up on all the complicated economic stuff because they found it was all pretty much garbage anyway.
I had that exact same experience.
Yeah, and they used to do calculus of variation, everything else, and have this beautiful math. Then they said, you know, the real world, all you pretty much know is whether it's going up or down, and all the rest of this is just pipe dreams. For very artificial cases, you could do this, like you have laptops and the only thing that will happen is they'll get stolen and then the whole thing is gone. And the only thing that matters is we have to pay for the hardware to buy a new one. Now, there are so many things wrong with that. It's hardly worth even talking anymore. But if you accept that, then you could do this calculation. But in fact, when you lose a laptop, the number one risk is the data on the laptop being stolen. And then there's the work that's not getting done because they don't have the laptop. And there's a whole bunch of fuzzy things in reality that mean the value of this math is a lot less than you would think. Anyway, so Octave has this series of 8 steps from Carnegie Mellon to do vulnerability evaluation. So you establish ways to measure risk, then you establish an information asset profile, and now you identify the containers of your asset and then areas of concern. So I think this means security boundaries. My assets are in some container, like these things are on one server or a server cluster on one service. So what's the risks to that thing? And then you have threat scenarios and risks, and you analyze them, and now you decide your mitigation. So this sounds pretty good in general terms. I think that's what you do. All right. So then there's other ways. You can use the Delphi method, like the Oracle at Delphi. You would go ask the Oracle, and the Oracle mystically knows things. So you go ask experts, give them a questionnaire, and then you assume experts know something, which, you know, maybe, maybe not. Then you got fault tree analysis, where you try to say, if a bad thing happens, this might happen, this might happen. You have a tree of consequences coming out from the bad thing. And then you got event tree analysis, which goes beyond faults to other kinds of events and all the possible things that might happen. So you try to draw a tree of those and then try to figure out what to do about them. And then you got Monte Carlo analysis, where you just make a mathematical model and you run simulations of different events where a chance of happening, chance of not happening, and try to average it out. That's sort of like the weather models they have, of like what's going to happen if we don't stop emitting greenhouse gases, how much will it heat up? They do some kind of computer simulation trying to get it right. These are all possible ways to do it. Anyway, so you can look at your risks by business or asset type or activity type, or by type of consequence. There are all different ways to look at it, and they all may suit you for different circumstances. There's no perfect solution. There are all these different ways to do it. So one thing that's common is if nobody is in charge of something, typically we totally neglected. So you assign risks to owners. Say it is your job to deal with check fraud. So make sure you're handling the fraud. And if the fraud goes up, then we'll come yell at you and say, why didn't you fix it? So you give a management person responsibility to oversee a risk, and you give them the ability to deploy some resources and controls to handle it. And that's what they focus on. And therefore, since they've got a limited responsibility, hopefully you can make them accountable for it and make them focus on that issue and hopefully take care of it. As general, if you're going to treat risk, you can either accept the risk, which means you do nothing and just let it happen as a calculated decision, or you mitigate by putting up some kind of control to limit the harm, or you avoid it by changing your business process to no longer do the risky activity at all. Just abandon that part of the business, or you try to transfer the risk with things like insurance or some kind of outsourcing where it becomes somebody else's problem. Those are the general ways you deal with the risk. So if you're going to do risk acceptance, where you do nothing about it, then you should typically only do that if the risk mitigation is expensive and the asset is not very expensive, or if the impact of the compromise is low. So then you should, there often is a valuation criteria where you decide who's allowed to make this decision. And if you're going to accept a low risk, then you don't need a very high privileged person. If you're going to accept a higher severe risk, then this really has to go up to the board of directors, the CEO, to make that strategic a decision, because that's risking your whole business. And that's certainly, there are risks. Like you can choose to do, for example, something fantastically illegal. I watch, for example, Trump is doing this all the time. He does outrageously illegal things. Now, if it was a logical company, he would decide what's the benefit and cost of this. Companies do this too. They flagrantly break the law because they figure they can get away with it, like AT&T. The US government came to them and said, hand over everything without a search warrant. And they said, yes, sir. We'll totally give everything to the government because we figure we can survive that. And they did, because they had a relationship with this. They had a belief that they could get away with taking a huge legal risk. And a lot of companies break the law in other ways. My undergraduate college in Pennsylvania was very short of money, like this place. So they brought in about 2 or 3 dozen Iranians who paid large amounts of money to get an engineering degree in the United States. And they brought them in without proper visas, breaking the law, to get their tuition. And they got that money for several years before they got caught and punished for it. But this is fairly common. You make a decision, you accept a risk to get the money, and it might be all right, it might not be all right. But you certainly want people high in the business to be making that decision. You don't want low-level people like this Jerome Kerviel guy who decided to risk billions of euros on risky investments without getting approval up high. That's why you don't want low-level people making risks that are too big. And risks is big. I took big risks teaching this hacking stuff. And in Silicon Valley, they're all full of move fast and break things. Facebook encourages, everybody does. Uber totally had a business model of barging into cities and breaking all the laws and just deploying stuff. And so did those people with the little scooters. They just move into a city, deploy those things everywhere. It was absolutely illegal, no permission at all. They said, fine, we'll get a lot of money before they get mad at us. And that's a fairly common business strategy, is just move fast and disrupt things, and we hate the government anyway, so who cares about the law? Sometimes it works. Anyway, so you may want to go back and revisit your accepted risks. If values of assets have changed, if the business have changed, if the threats have changed, or if the cost of mitigation has changed, you probably need to go review your decisions to do risky things and whether you really still want to keep doing that risky thing. Then you got controls. Typically, risk treatment leads to controls. You decide to put in different procedures, more levels of management review, more firewalls and authentication rules and such whatever it is to stop these. Legal considerations often place requirements on you. PCI DSS has a lot of mandatory protective requirements. You must have encryption at rest, encryption in transit, and a bunch of others on your credit card data. HIPAA has a lot of optional measures. It actually doesn't require you to do things. It says you should address this and that. You sort of have to write an essay explaining why what you're doing is okay. And PCI DSS even has mandatory risk assessments and pen tests for large providers. You must get an official QSA, a quality service or something. There's official people you must hire just to do a PCI audit every year. If you get more than, I think, 500,000 transactions per year or something. And then there's compliance risk. If you are out of compliance, then what are the consequences? Well, for example, if you actually are out of compliance, and that means you are not secure and you get hacked, now you have a security incident that was caused by your failure to be in compliance. So that's one risk. Another one is just, even though you didn't get hacked, you were technically out of compliance and you might be fined by a regulatory agency or sued by a company that hired you just because you failed to meet the letter of the law. I mean, I used to do this stuff when I was in the claims settlement administrator, and this stuff was called actual damages, and this stuff was called statutory damages. Statutory damages means you broke the law and it didn't actually do any harm, but still you broke the law, and so there's a certain amount of punishment just for that. And the other one is you actually caused somebody to lose money. Now you have actual damages as opposed to just having broken a theoretical law. Anyway, they're both risks. So the threats may change, the impacts may change, and your efficiency may change as time goes on. And then there's the concept of total cost of ownership, which I think I learned, like a lot of people, from Microsoft. Microsoft had this argument for years. People said, why should I pay for Windows? Because Linux is free. And Microsoft said, well, Linux is not really free. It might be free to buy, but then where do you get staff that knows how to use it? How do you update your software to go on it? How do you get security patches and drivers and everything? What happens to all these other things you need in your business? And you'll end up actually spending more total money using Linux than you will using Windows. And I think they were probably right about that. Anyway, that's an issue. If you consider everything, training your staff, how do you get rid of the stuff when you're done with it, consider all the cost. And the fact is, the cost of the software license is very small. It's the cost of the people, training them and hiring right people and giving them promotions and sending them off to classes and everything. And that's the real cost. Although I'd say this is why a lot of people are better off with Macs, because Windows are so expensive because of all the security problems and antivirus and all that garbage, which you don't have with the Mac. So even though the Mac costs more in the first place, the total cost of ownership might be less. Anyway, that's the argument here. Total cost of ownership is once you make a decision to go with a certain provider, like the military, going with Azure instead of Amazon, that's going to have a total cost in terms of how well does that stuff really work in 5 years, how much effort do we have to put into it. And I don't know if anybody can assess that, but that's the kind of thing they should be thinking about. Not just the initial price, but the total cost of this decision. Anyway, I got some more Kahoots. And I see another chat message coming in. Is there a good provider for case studies? I'm not sure what that means. I know Gartner is the famous one to do business analysis. There's a bunch of companies that do business analysis for sort of general information about market segments. There's a bunch of people who try to assess the value of different market segments for investors. And then there's people who are like detectives who are like try to do competitive analysis on your particular competitors. So there's quite a few different ways to do it. I don't know a good generic answer. Gartner's the most famous one, but there are a lot of others. I heard a podcast this morning, and this guy said that if you're in the top 10 in your vertical, in any business, you're the target for APTs. Mostly China, because they have to develop whatever you're doing, and they just hack whoever the most famous people are in everything, cars or whatever you make, to make sure they're stealing your designs and stuff. So people used to think, I'm not going to be targeted by APTs. And he said, You don't want to jump to that conclusion. If you're standing out, you're probably a target. Anyway. All right. Guess I'll wait a few more seconds to see if we got more. Aha, there are more. Okay. Mr. Green with the lead pipe in the library, I think is. Colonel Green? I forget. Anyway. All right, I guess we can go. So, okay, which threat uses the latest techniques? Okay, those are the emerging threats. All right. Which threat is most likely to cause an incident? Yep, the man-made threat, in particular, of course, the insider threat. The most likely thing is your own employees will do a bad thing. All right. Insurance costs $10K per year. So what should you compare that to decide whether to buy? The ALE, the annualized lost expectancy, is what you compare that to. That's how much money you're going to lose per year without insurance. That's what you should compare to see if the insurance is worth buying. All right. Which one uses questionnaires given to experts? That's the Delphi. You hope that there is this wise person that can tell you what to do. Okay, which item excludes all the expenses resulting from purchase? Includes them, all the expenses. Yeah, that's the total cost of ownership. All right, so CAP is in here twice, and MDOT is in here twice, and ICWK. Good, I know who that is. All right, so those are the winners. All right, you folks should email your paper in by today, otherwise it'll be late. And I'll stick around and help anybody who wants to work on things. Yeah, what's up?
Your Spark server.
Yeah.
License expired.
I thought I fixed them all, but if the license expired, okay, I can fix it. Which one? 2 or 3?
3 and 4.
Oh, I fixed those. While I was in Utah, I fixed them.
No, still same.
Oh. I thought
Okay,
I'll take a look at it. Good, because I know how to fix that. It's pretty easy. But okay, good. Anything else? Let's see if there are any chat messages coming in. Nothing new. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the share. I'll stick around in the room here to help anybody who wants to work on things, and I'll fix that Splunk server. I had another chat coming in. Need help getting into Instructure. All right. Let me see. To get into Instructure, you go here. Now, the main thing people do that cause people have trouble is you try to use the City College Instructure. I never use City College anything. Everything they have around here is too messed up to use. So I go down here and use this. And you may have to create your own account. You can make a new account someplace here. You can be a new user, or if you already have an account, you can use it. So does that help, or do you need something else? But don't use the City College thing. Use the link from my page. That'll take you to a different thing called instructor free for teachers, which is what I'm using. If you go to the City College thing, there is an account for this class, but none of my stuff is on there. That's something they create, and because it's under City College control, they put huge restrictions on it that would make it impossible for me to do what I need to do. So I hope that helps. And I guess I'm going to stop the share unless there are any more comments coming in. All right, and feel free to email, call your staff. Yeah, email the you can call me after class if you want to talk to me, or you can email the place where homework goes, and my grader can help you. Let me send you a PM with my number. Right, let's do that. All right, so here's my number. It's not super secret, but anyway, there, you got my number. So just call me. I'm going to stop the share, and I can talk to you on the phone. We can work this out. Okay, very well.